All right. Well, I'll go ahead and start the webinar presentation with the intro. Hi, everyone. My name is Shondine Jones. I am the Communications Manager for Flower Hill Institute. And today I'll be moderating today's presentation for the MPPEP Round 2 webinar. First and foremost, thank you all for everyone joining us today, this afternoon, for the Meat and Poultry Processing Expansion Program Phase 2 Grant Program Applicant webinar. Today we'll go fully in depth on the overview for the MPPEP grant program, as well as covering eligibility, ineligibility, and scoring criteria. In addition, we will also be providing additional tips and resources available to USDA grant applicants, including the USDA Meat and Poultry Processing Capacity Technical Assistance Program. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the Flower Hill Institute YouTube channel, as well as the Flower Hill Institute MPPTA webinar webpage at flowerhill.institute/webinars. Today, we will also be conducting a live Q&A session at the end of today's webinar presentation. So please feel free to post any posing questions to the chat room feature below to ensure that all your questions are answered at the end of today's presentation. And if we're not able to get to all of your questions at the end of today's event, we are also holding Flower Hill Institute MPPTA office hours. This month, we will be hosting an office hour on September 27th at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So if we're not able to get all of your answers to you today, we are also holding space this month on the 27th for an additional Q&A session regarding the MPPEP Phase 2. Today's presentation is going to be presented by Dave Carter alongside Dr. Robert Maddock from the MPPTA program. Dave Carter is a Technical Assistance Provider Director for Flower Hill Institute, and Dr. Robert Maddock is the MPPTA Technical Assistance Officer for the American Meat Science Association. Without further ado, Dave.
Thank you, Shondine. And I too want to welcome everybody to this webinar. This is a really important grant, and we want to make sure that people understand the process and have a chance to put together as strong of a proposal as they can. So in addition to Rob and myself, Chris Roper, who's a fellow regional director, is also here on the screen, and he'll be able to weigh in with some comments or answer some of the questions as we go along. We're going to start off here. Let me just to start the presentation. And let's see, there we go. So we're going to focus today on the Meat and Poultry Processing Expansion Program Phase 2. This program is part of an overall commitment that the Biden administration has made over the last couple of years to creating a more resilient, diverse, and equitable meat and poultry processing system. And this is a grant that I know a lot of people have been waiting for. The Meat and Poultry Processing Expansion Program grant, the Phase 2, will have $123 million in funding available. And it's to help eligible processors or prospective processors develop or expand processing capacity. The application deadline is November 22nd. I'll talk about that in just a second. And this particular grant is being done in partnership with the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. So they're going to be helping rural development with the administration of this grant program. Now, I mentioned that the deadline on this program is you have until 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, November 22nd. Now, that doesn't mean 11:59 Mountain Time or Pacific Time or Hawaiian time. It is the same for everyone. And we mentioned that just because I see Chris smiling here that on one of the previous grants, he got a call late at night saying, hey, do you know somebody on the Pacific time frame that could file this grant? No, everybody's under the same time. Now, it's also important to note that November 22nd is the day before Thanksgiving. And so if you're waiting until the last minute to get some information from your lender or letters of support, a lot of people take off that week. So that's one more reason not to wait until the last minute. Really advisable to get this grant in at least 2 weeks in advance of the deadline. Give yourself that cushion in case there's a hidden bummer factor that comes up, because they will not consider anything that comes in after the deadline. Now, the first step, if you have not done so already, it's very important that you begin the process to get set up in the SAMS.gov system, the System for Award Management. This is a requirement for the MPEP Phase 2. And we emphasize this because it's a multi-step process. When you go through, you first of all get set up and you get assigned a unique entity identifier. But then you have to go through and do some additional steps to get it set up with your SAMS registration and to get that cage code. A lot of people got hung up on this under the MCAP grant a few months back. They went through they got their UEI, they thought they were good to go. They went to submit their grant and found out that they hadn't completed the process. So look at section 4.6 of the RFA for those registration instructions. And Flower Hill Institute will also be putting on a webinar this coming Friday at this time, noon Mountain Time, focused specifically on the process and the requirements to get set up in grants.gov. We're very fortunate, Colleen Whitehead, who's a consultant to our team who specializes in this area, is going to be facilitating that webinar. So Colleen can walk you through and help you understand those instructions that are in section 4.6. So if you're interested, if you don't have your registration yet, make a plan to tune into that webinar or at least to listen to the recording. Now, the MPEP Phase 2 grant has a maximum award available of $10 million or 30% of your total project cost, whichever is less. So if you have a $20 million project, you could apply for $6 million of funding because that's the 30%, which is less. You can't apply for the 10 million. The minimum award is $250,000, and this grant has a cost sharing requirement of 70%. You get 30% from USDA, but you have to provide the other 70%. And you're going to have to provide evidence of your ability to meet that cost sharing criteria at the time of the award. So it's important that you get letters of intent or evidence of your lines of credit or other factors that you need to have, because they will verify that at the time of the award. And if you can't meet that, then they will go to the next highest scoring applicant. You have a 4-year period to complete a project, 48 months from the time of award. They estimate that they're going to be awarding these grants next April. So it would be 48 months from then that you would have the ability to complete your project. This grant also has an equipment only provision, but the threshold on it is fairly high. It's a minimum of $5 million to request for equipment only. So that means if you have a project where you're looking at about $17 million in equipment, then this one might be a good fit for you. They set that threshold relatively high because the MCAP grant that just closed in July had that equipment only provision that was much lower. So they kind of put the bar higher on this one. Under MPEP 2, USDA is really focusing on projects that are technically feasible, financially viable, have secured the other sources. Again, that's 70% of funding. Accommodate different species. This is an important one that we'll talk about in just a minute. But the bottom line is that they want to know that you are expanding processing capacity. If you're going to put in an application that is just to replace equipment or to do some refurbishing, and you're not going to be able to demonstrate that you are increasing your capacity, you're not going to qualify. That is a key requirement. Eligible entities to apply: In terms of the business structure, this is very wide open. For-profits, nonprofits, co-ops, tribes, state and local governments. And it specifically says other entities, regardless of legal structure, who currently engage or plan to engage in expanding meat and poultry processing capacity. Again, expansion is the bottom line. Now, there are some folks who can't apply for this grant, specifically the Big Four in both meat and poultry, or anyone who sources more of 20% of their inputs or provides more than 20% of their outputs to the Big Four. Any projects that don't clearly expand processing capacity, as I just mentioned, and projects that are just custom exempt or not operating on a commercial basis, they won't qualify. And finally, any applicants who've already received funding from the local MCAP, the Indigenous Animal Harvesting Grant, or the Phase 1 of the MPPEP are not eligible for funding under MPPEP 2. Now, I put an asterisk there because we know that we're kind of tight here with the MCAP scoring. The MCAP funding, the application was in July. USDA Agricultural Marketing Service received 800 applications for MCAP, a lot more than they anticipated. So they've been working hard to put together an additional review panel and get the process done so that they can get those MCAP grants scored and awarded as soon as possible. But there's a chance that they might not get that done by November. And if that's the case, if you have an MCAP and you also receive the MPPEP, you're going to have to make a choice. You can't receive them both. Now, the eligibility requirements for MPPEP 2 is you have to process or plan to process anything that is a amenable species under the Meat Inspection or the Poultry Inspection Act. That includes beef, pork, poultry, lamb, goats, and it also includes catfish. I won't explain why, but catfish are classified as an amenable species. They are the only aquatic species that is eligible for funding under MPPEP. Seafood is not. But you're also eligible if you process non-amenable species that are subject to voluntary FSI inspection. Those are things like bison, farmed elk, farmed deer. You have to have or plan to get your grant of inspection through FSIS or through a qualified state inspection program or through the cooperative interstate shipment program by the time as a part of your grant. And then it's also very important that you're going to have to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and with the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. These are things, there's a checklist, there's a link in Section 1.5 of the RFA that goes to an environmental checklist that you'll need to complete at the time of submitting your grant. You don't have to go through and actually do the NEPA, but you have to complete that checklist. MPPEP 2 is also subject to the provisions of the Build America, Buy America Act. That is an act that requires you to give preference to any domestically produced products. Now, we understand that there are certain things. If you're asking for equipment that's manufactured in Italy and not available in the US, there is a provision for a waiver, but be very cognizant that you're under the Build America, Buy America provisions. And then finally, I can't repeat it enough, that you are demonstrating that you are increasing slaughter capacity. Now, we've had some questions come in about, well, gosh, I do further processing or just value-added products. Am I eligible? To be eligible as a further processor, you must also slaughter the animals that will be provided for the further processing. You're not going to be eligible if you're just bringing in totes of trim or boxes of box beef and doing the further processing. They want to know that you are increasing your slaughter capacity. You're also going to be helpful to demonstrate that you're increasing the demand for animals and you're increasing the opportunities for producers in your area to access value-added markets. And that you are increasing the financial viability of an existing processing operation by adding on that value added or further processing component. Now, MPEP 2 has some specific requirements for business plans and feasibility studies. Everybody will have to supply a business plan with at least a 2-year pro forma. If you're an existing business, you need to also provide a 3-year balance sheet and profit and loss statement. Feasibility studies are going to be required for any projects that are in business for less than a year, as well as existing projects that are moving into new areas, new markets outside of their current market, or are processing new species or establishing any new product lines. If you do not have a feasibility study yet, as soon as this webinar is done, it's time to get going because they do take some time. USDA requires that feasibility studies be done by a qualified third party. Now, they qualified is a self-certifying term, but it has to be done by a disinterested third party. You cannot write your own feasibility study. And Rural Development has a 2-page guide that can be very helpful that has the areas that they're going to be looking for in that feasibility study. We'll also talk about some other resources toward the end of the webinar. But look at section 4.2.3 of the RFA to determine whether or not you need a feasibility study or if a simple business plan will suffice. So, how can the funds be used? This is a very broad-ranging grant. You can build, modernize, expand processing of facilities. You can use it for mobile or modular slaughter facilities as long as you're doing it under inspection. You can purchase real estate for a new facility. Now, you can't purchase real estate that's not related to expanding your processing. If you're going to put a new office building or something out there, yep, that's not going to qualify. It's got to be related to processing expansion. You can use it for equipment, for modernizing, customizing, bringing on new technology, complying with packaging and labeling requirements, for developing technologies that improve worker conditions, modify facilities for food safety, reduce greenhouse gases and other pollutant emissions. And let me just emphasize that one, that they're really looking for grants that meet one or more of the administration's climate smart agriculture goals. There's a link to that in the RFA. You can offset costs associated with becoming inspected. You can use it for staffing, for workforce recruitment, training and retention, and for complying with USDA regulatory. Also, it's not mentioned here, but you can use funds for bringing in rendering equipment or composting that are directly related to your meat processing for human consumption uses. The application format is listed in section 4.2.2. You are limited to 35-page total application on this. Now, they recommend that you use the template that is linked in 4.2.2. That's a Word document. You just go through and you can fill it in. The template is 15 pages. So if you're using that template, your narrative is limited to 20 pages. You've got to be able to tell your story very succinctly. And Rob Maddock will talk about that in a minute, about why that's so important. Now, your environmental information, your financials, letters of support, those type of things are not included in the page limit. It's your narrative and the blanks in that template that are included. It's very important. And again, this is a reason why you should want to get your grant done well in advance of the deadline, is to have your grant application reviewed, have it proofread, have it re-reviewed. Look at it, get another set of eyes on it as much as you can. Don't hesitate to reach out to your state USDA Rural Development Office. Many cases, if they have the bandwidth, they will be able to give you a cursory review. They're not going to score it, but they're going to look it over and tell you that, gosh, something might be missing. You need to include something here just to make sure that you have a complete application. Our meat and poultry processing technical assistance team is also available to do cursory reviews. We will go through, again, we can't score it, but we will help you try and put together a very good, complete process. Now, there are always three things that I tell people on any grant. Number one, what does it cover and how much do I have to provide? We've already talked about that. Number two, am I eligible? But number three is, how do they score it? USDA is always very clear on the scoring criteria for their grants, and this is no exception. They have this laid out very well. So here's how the scoring is going to work for this grant. First of all, up to 10 points on the alignment intent. Are you expanding operations in your local market? Are you accommodating different species? Remember, I said that before. A couple of areas here. They want to know that you're not just focusing on one species. You're going to get additional points if you're doing beef, pork, bison, poultry, rabbits, you name it. Are you expanding the volume? 20 points for the market impact. Are you procuring more animals from producers? Again, the diversity in species. Are you paying your producers fairly for the animals that you're buying? The next two, I always say, these are almost the feasibility study questions. Total of 40 points, but these two, is it financially viable? Do you have a clear work plan? Is it technically achievable? Do you have good management? Are you complying with the regulations? Then your 10 points, you providing well-paying jobs and benefits? 10 points for the environmental, for your waste management, your energy efficient technologies. This is where you can talk about the climate smart agriculture provisions. And then 10 points for community impact and support. Get letters from state and local leaders, not to just say, oh, we support this project, but specifically why this project is important to the community, to the producers. Get letters from local associations, from your local cattlemen's associations or pork producers, or from get letters from key stakeholders, people that are going to be providing you with animals. The section of the RFA has a specific format for those letters of support. Be sure to read that. And then there's another 15 points that are discretionary that are going to be provided for projects that increase diversity, serve underserved producers, have geographic diversity, a variety of factors. Focus in on those scoring. And that's why now I'm going to turn it over to Rob Maddock, who's going to talk about how these scoring panels look at a grant and determine that criteria. So go ahead, Rob.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Let me pull up mine.
Yeah, let me stop.
So hopefully, okay. Can we see that fine?
See it real well, Rob.
Okay, so I think I got into your slides here, didn't I? Run through all these. Well,
Keep going. You're about there.
my computer's doing so funny. So, okay. There, are we good now?
Yep.
All right. So thanks. So hopefully we're seeing the right slides here. I'm going to talk a little bit about how after you've done the hard work, your proposal is submitted, what happens next. And I've been on both sides of this. I've written several proposals, and I've been on some review panels, including I was on the review panel for MPPEP round 1. So I'm going to give you some insight as you prepare your proposals and how things are going to work. That's me. I'm Rob Maddock with the American Meat Science Association. We're the technical scientific organization. So if you're familiar with the university, the extension meets people, those tend to be people who are part of our membership. So the way this works is you submit your proposals. You've done all the hard work. You've jumped through the hoops, and hopefully you clear the first hurdle. And that is everything's filled in, everything's properly submitted. And then the federal agency, in this case, USDA Rural Development, is going to make sure that it is what you're actually in the right program. You got the right forms there. You're in the right area. You're in the right spot in grants.gov. They do not evaluate or rank proposals at this time. So they're just saying that everything is there. And then the USDA will have somebody help to recruit panelists that are experts in the area. In MPPEP 1, these were mostly university meets people, business and industry experts. Depending on how many applications there could be several dozen panelists that end up getting recruited for this. But these are people who know the business and know the way meats work and the way the meat business runs. The procedure then is each panelist only receives 3 proposals, or each reviewer receives three proposals to review. You get one as a first reviewer, one as a second, and one as a third. Okay. The first reviewer is supposed to know your proposal inside and out. They take notes on it. They've got understand it completely. They've been through the budget. They've been through all your narrative. They've checked every document. They've read everything, and they're going to assign scores based on that rubric that Dave already showed you. The second reviewer also reads your proposal in its entirety. Okay, they're going to make notes of the project's strengths and weaknesses, and also are going to provide a score. The third reviewer reads your proposal, hopefully understands your objectives, can add notes, but may not have dove in quite as deep into reading your actual proposal. Okay. And so it's important to see. So there may be, 8 to 20 people on a panel, right? Each reviewer is only going to see 3 proposals in their entirety. One is a first, one is a second, and one is a third. So each reviewer really only sees 3 proposals. Okay. Then the panel convenes. We do this online, big Zoom meetings, depending again on how many applications come in. A panel could be as few as 8 panelists, could be as many as 20. A 20-person panel is going to take several days to go through. And if there ends up, like in the MCAP, being several hundred MPPEP proposals, this procedure is going to take a long time. But we all get together online, and in some sort of random order, each proposal is presented by the reviewer. So reviewer number 1, or the first reviewer, goes through and describes your proposal in some detail to the rest of the panel. Now remember, only 3 people on the panel have actually seen the entire proposal, the first, second, and third reviewers. The rest of the 5 to 18 or so people on the panel, this is the first time they've actually seen your proposal. Okay, they have 5 minutes to do this, and you can imagine, because there's so many proposals, that the time to get this done, it gets pretty short. Okay, so they have 5 minutes, and they're going to go through the strengths, weaknesses, the feasibility. They may talk about how they scored it and what they think about this proposal. And there's really not a set way that the first reviewer does this. Okay, then the second reviewer gets to jump in and adds, and they often say, yes, the first reviewer found this and this. In addition, I think these things are going on. And they're going to fill in some gaps and help add to the narrative. The third reviewer then has a very short time and say, yep, I agree with the first 2, or in addition, I thought I saw this in this proposal as well. And then after those 8 or 9 minutes have been taken, the entire panel discusses your proposal. And this is all done in 12 minutes total. Okay. So 8 minutes of discussion, another 4 minutes for the entire panel to go through and digest your entire proposal, and have a quick discussion about it. At that point, initial scores are assigned, okay, to your overall proposal. During this, discussion, that first reviewer takes notes of the discussion. And oftentimes the panel say, well, this looks like a really good idea, or I'm not quite sure what's going on here. This doesn't appear it fits, but they're going to take all those notes. And then there's a review for a system for review that the first reviewer goes in. And they will put their notes in, they'll list out the strengths and weaknesses, and they'll put in the scores that they've assigned. The second reviewer and third reviewer go in after the first reviewer is done, and they can add notes as well. And these are all kept separate so they can tell which reviewer actually added into the notes. Okay. After all the proposals have been reviewed by the entire panel, they are then ranked. So a panel, as you can imagine, I believe for MPPEP 1, there was maybe 3 different panels were working at the same time. And so they each had to kind of come up with their own ranks. But at the end, then, after everything has been reviewed, the entire panel gets back together, so all this 8 to 20 or so people, and in this, when they reconvene, they talk about each of them. So they'll basically USDA personnel or the project manager will bring up the proposals in the order of the highest scored to lowest, and you kind of go through and have kind of a general discussion. So this also has to happen very quickly because we don't have time to spend 10, even 5 minutes on each proposal. If there are several dozen proposals in there, again, it would take several days or weeks to get through all these. Okay. Basically, sometimes depending on the directions of the panel, there may be a funding line, and you may find that, okay, for your panel, it looks like the top 12 proposals are the ones that are going to get funded. And oftentimes there's some fairly obvious top 2 or 3 that we don't spend much time on. But when you get down around that funding line, that's when a lot more discussion can occur. Ultimately, USDA is going to make the final funding decision. Okay, AMS, Egg Marketing Service and Rural Development in this case. But they're not going to deviate very far from what that panel has recommended. Just they can't do that, otherwise it would the point of the panel would become really diminished. Okay, so some important things as you write your proposals. Remember, the entire panel sees your proposal for 12 minutes. Right? 8 minutes where it gets presented, 4 minutes of discussion. So what does that mean? Is you need a champion. When you rate your proposal, your number 1 reviewer, whoever gets assigned, and that's random, you don't know who they are, and you actually won't know it afterwards either, has to fall in love with your proposal. Okay. As a result, you need to do a good job writing them. So if your first reviewer does not like your proposal for some reason, it was difficult, it was hard to read, the information was hard to find, or they didn't believe it met the intent of the project very well, you're not going to get funded because they're the person who's trying to sell, who is selling and presenting the proposal to the rest of the panel. So this is super important. When you think about writing these, you have to have it clear enough so that it can be presented very quickly. Some other things, having been on both sides of this, and you've already seen these points, and I'm just going to add a little bit to this as well on these, where these points line up. Alignment and intent, you're not going to get very far, as Dave already mentioned, if your intent and alignment doesn't match up. Okay, it's got very defined goals, and Dave presented those already. Make sure you're addressing them to maximize those points. Market impact and opportunities. In the RFA, it does talk about how your project will benefit producers and consumers. And I think we sometimes in MPPEP, we haven't talked about consumers as near as much as we should, but we're increasing markets for people. We're helping producers, processors, but also there's got to be a consumer component is there that you need to address as well. The financial viability. The big concern for these is if a lot of projects get funded and nothing happens, right? They fail. And if they fail in a hurry, what happens? I mean, it's a lost opportunity. So making sure that you can show that your project, whether it's expansion or a new build, is viable is super important. And you need to have this spelled out very clearly. Technical merit and achievability. Can you do what you say you're going to do? Prove to your reviewers that you can do the project, whether it's finding the expertise or you have the expertise. Those sorts of things, super important, because if you know nothing about the meats industry and you're going to just build a processing plant and make lots of money, those proposals probably don't get very far. if you can't prove that you know how to actually accomplish this project. Labor and personnel, how are you going to attract, maintain labor? Salary benefits are really great if you put them in there. I've seen some proposals where people think they're going to try and hire a plant manager for $17 an hour. That's probably, if I was a reviewer, I'd say, yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. And it's going to color the rest of my evaluation of your proposal. Kind of have some idea of what you're going to do for labor and personnel. Just as a side note, when we talk to small processors, labor needs typically becomes the #1 concern for a lot of projects. So if you can address that very well, that's going to help your proposal quite a bit. Environmental impact. Part of that is using that whole animal for slaughter, byproduct utilization. From a reviewer standpoint, if you could tell me what you're going to do with your offal streams, and at least have an idea, it may not be fully fleshed out, but some sort of idea, that's going to help you score a lot of points. Being sustainable in terms of lower electricity, water, waste stream needs, that's going to go a long way too. And it's going to help you out as you try to score those points. Community impact and support. This is kind of given. This program is very much set up to help local communities. You don't have to be in a small town to score well, but how are you going to, what sort of support, how are you going to impact the community around you? And we have this question a lot. How many letters of support should I get? I don't believe they're limited in the page limit. Get as many as you think you can get, whether it's your local business development corporations, it's your bank, it's the local community, it's your stockmen's association, it's the local ranchers, it's consumers. Lots of letters show support, and that's going to help as well. And for this one as well, Dave pointed out, there's some discretionary points that USDA is going to assign kind of after the fact. Those are not going to be assigned by the review panel. But having a unique proposal, I think, will probably help you develop some of those as well. So a couple of additional things. How to sell this to that, especially that first reviewer. Make sure you're using the format. Great thing that you now, in this round, have a template. This is going to be super good. Use that template. Reviewers are going to see these, and they're going to be a lot better off if you come in that standard format where they can evaluate one proposal versus another one. Okay. Obviously, we said meet the intent of the project. Expansion. It's the meat and poultry processor expansion program. So hammer on that expansion. Okay. Make the important information easy to find. Market impact, financial valuability, technical merit. That's the most points. I believe that's 60 of the 100 points that the reviewers are going to assign. Right. Make it easy to find. Right. Bullet points, white space, charts, tables. Throw it out there. Make sure that you say the market impact. Here's what's going to happen, and then say it again. I know we're limited on pages, but I think in your narrative you should be able to really hammer home these parts. Okay. I'll say this from looking at being through and seeing, the first round of MPPEPs. Most of the proposals had a really good idea. A lot of them were going to develop processing facilities in underserved areas. They had rancher support, but a lot of them didn't sell the idea very well. They didn't prove that they're going to be viable, that they had a plan for success that were 5 and 10 years out. Even though we're limited by pages, you can be redundant, right? Sell your idea, tell your what idea is again, reinforce it, reinforce your plan for success and the feasibility. Tell us 2 or 3 times why this is a feasible project and why we should fund it. Because remember, those reviewers, they're going pretty quick, and if they can hammer that home, that's going to help you quite a bit. Some additional things as I get close to wrapped up. The highest rated proposals in the first round of MPPEP, and I'll guarantee the highest rated proposals going forward are going to have a plan to succeed. It threads through all of them, all the way from intent through those letters of support. How are you going to be in business in 5 years, in 10 years? How is this going to be a lasting contribution to your community? How are we going to expand the livestock production, the meat production scope in perpetuity? Okay. Have that plan. Know the RFA, read it, have it as you write your proposal, have the RFA out next to you so you can read it and make sure that everything is as the request has stated. And this last point I want to make, and you could read that, reviewers are human. If I'm the reviewer and I see your sentence structure is poor, there's misspelled words, your grammar's not what very good, you could have a great idea, but people are not going to be as receptive to your proposal if it's not well written. Now, you're not saying you have to hire a high dollar grant writer to help you with this, but what you do have to have is somebody else read the proposal. Okay, maybe it's an English teacher for your, from your local high school, but just somebody can read it, and they don't even have to have a lot of knowledge about the meats industry, but they can proofread for things like paragraphs, sentence structure, misspelled words. Spell check and Word isn't going to catch everything, so just be well aware that actually matters, and so have that proposal reviewed. There's my information. We're easy to find. Anywhere if you go to that any of the websites there, they're going to get you the Technical Assistance Network, and you'll get into any of the partners, and we'll talk about those as we go on. But there I am. Like I said, we're all pretty easy to find, and we all work together on this to make this work as well. So I'll probably stop my share and let
I'll jump back in. Yep.
Dave back in. Okay, I need to get out. And I should be back out.
Right. So the good thing is that you're not alone in trying to put together a grant proposal. USDA Secretary Vilsack realized that when there was this major commitment to creating a more resilient, diverse, and equitable meat and poultry processing system, that the folks that USDA is trying to reach out to are probably not folks that submit grants all the time or have written grants. They need to have some assistance. So the USDA, through the Agricultural Marketing Service, has put together a very robust network to provide technical assistance to anyone who is looking at this funding. So Chris and I are with the Flowery Hill Institute, along with Sean Dean. We have the cooperative agreement with AMS to coordinate the network, but the other participants are the American Association of Meat Processors, the largest association for meat processing in the U.S., but they don't represent the large processors. They represent everyone else. Rob is with the American Meat Science Association, as he explained. We've got the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute that really helps us to identify new uses for meat and byproducts. There's the Intertribal Agriculture Council that is helping us specifically with outreach to tribes and tribal producers. The Niche Meat Processing Assistance Network through Oregon State University, an extension-based program. I think a lot of people are familiar with the work that Rebecca Thistlethwaite and her team have done through the years. And Tuskegee University is on board now as a formal technical assistance provider. In addition, we have nearly 20 memorandums of understanding with partner nonprofit organizations that are helping us with outreach, but also bringing some resources to the table to help us assist folks. So there are really 4 areas of support that our technical assistance network is able to provide. First of all, funding technical assistance. What we're doing right now is helping people identify grants, helping them put together their grant proposals. We can't write your grant for you. We can't do your feasibility study, but we can coach you through the process. The agricultural business development. What are you going to do if you're expanding your operation? You want to go into a new market. How do you develop? What's your business plan? What's your marketing plan? What are you intending to do with those products? Processing, technical, and operational support. Should you be looking at a brick and mortar facility, or maybe a modular or a mobile facility, or how large does it need to be? What kind of equipment do you need to have in there? And then finally, the supply chain development. How are you going to source the inputs for your plants, the animals? How are you going to distribute them and get them into the market? How are you going to use those byproducts? Maybe you're going to get into pet food. Maybe you're going to get into something else. So We're here to help you with all 4 of those areas. And how it works is if you are not signed up with us already, as soon as this webinar is over, we encourage you to go in and put in a request for technical assistance. You can either use that QR code to submit it or go to that link. And that is going to come in to our team. We will review that within 24 hours. And we'll generally get back and say, gosh, we need a little bit more information. Chris is great for this. He reviews these and he gets them out saying, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're trying to do so we can figure out how we can help? Maybe some people are just looking for the RFA or a link to some resource, and so we'll send that to them. But the main thing that we do is we try and link you with the appropriate technical assistance provider. Again, all of the resources that are in that network, from NPAN to Tuskegee to IAC, are there to help you out. Now, we also have some other resources I want to mention very quickly. Is we have an online toolkit through Flower Hill Institute that has a directory of consultants. If you need somebody to help you with your grant or your feasibility study, or to provide you with a quote on equipment, we have a listing in there. We have a listing of pertinent grants. There are others in addition to MPPEP that are out there that you may be wanting to access. We have marketplace information that you can use for your feasibility study or business plan. We have a lot of links on regulatory compliance. So don't hesitate to go in and poke around that toolkit to try and find the information that you need. And then USDA has a lot of resources that are available. They have the links to the grant documents, but there's also frequently asked questions. There's some guidelines there. So don't hesitate to use that. And then, as Sean Dean said at the outset, we're going to do a couple of office hours. There's office hours on September 27th and October 26th that we will be available just to answer some questions in real time. And so you can find the links by going in and registering for those. So with that, I want to thank, before we turn it over to Q&A, Chris, is there anything that we missed?
No, you guys did a great job, and we appreciate everybody tuning in. And I see a lot of familiar names on here. And please, even if we're not able to get to your question today, make sure and send us an email. If you're already in our technical assistance network, you're welcome to send us an email direct. Or if you're not in our network already and you don't have our emails, you can always sign up for technical assistance and submit that technical assistance inquiry form so that we can follow up with you. We can reach out to you. We can get you our newsletters. We try to send out the most up-to-date information possible as it comes out. So keep that in mind. Please make sure when you sign up to click to receive our newsletters, and you'll get our e-alerts as things happen as fast as we can get it out to you. So with that, if you'd like, Dave, I'll read the questions off, and we can run down. There's not too many of them. I think we can probably get to most of them. Are you ready, Dave?
I'm ready.
All right. Question 1 was the very first one. If we get selected for the MCAP grant, are we able to choose not to accept the grant to potentially be selected for this grant?
Yeah, this is, you kind of have your choice. So, you only get to one. You can't double dip on anything. So you get to make that choice. But we're hoping, AMS keeps telling us that they are doing their best to get that MCAP grant out here by the end of the fiscal year. But I know that's going to be a challenge to them.
Yeah. I think everyone has to make their own business decision on that one. Yeah, not much we can advise on that. Other you can only get one. So next question is, if we have a project that only needs $1 million in equipment, we aren't able to apply. That is correct. Are we able to make some facility improvements to then apply under the construction and equipment pool? I would say yes to that one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Next question, is this grant only for existing processing facilities or for potential new facilities? I think Dave covered this pretty well, but it can be new or existing facilities, but you have to be expanding slaughter capacity. You cannot just be doing added value.
And those new facilities, you're going to have that feasibility study to show how you're going to expand that slaughter capacity.
Next question here is, would building a separate refrigeration space on the current site to expand storage capacity for the business's current market require a feasibility study?
No, that one should not. If you're not processing new species or going into new products or going outside of your current market, then you don't have to have the feasibility study if you've been in operation for at least a year. So that's one area where your business plan with your balance sheet and your P&L should be able to suffice.
Yeah, and everyone be very careful as these questions are worded. We're trying to answer them the best we can based on what the information we have. We do encourage you all to, send these questions in writing and email to us. If there's more to your operation or more to your business, or if your business plan shows something different, obviously that could change the answer dramatically. So we all have to be careful. Next question is, can a custom exempt business apply if it intends to operate as a federally inspected site with the proposed capacity improvements? Yes, you can. This is a 48-month grant period, so you would have 48 months to implement your project and be inspected by the end of that period. Next question, non-amenable voluntary inspection has a very high FSIS inspection cost, which for amenable products are free. Can these inspection costs be paid for by the grant? I'm going to go out on that one. Yeah, I'm going to say this would not be a project cost. This would not be a direct cost of implementing a project. Again, we can follow up on this, but right off the cuff here, I'm going to say no.
Yeah. And Douglas, I feel your pain on that. My background is in the bison business, so I understand, what you're talking about there. But I think that's going to be more of an operations cost rather than an expansion cost.
Yeah. Next question is there a limit on number of letters of support to include or recommended number? I think Rob answered this already. There's not a limit to letters of support, but there is a limit on your application. So you're going to have to make everything fit within that 35 pages. So use caution with all that. Looks like we got Brennan's question answered. Tony's the next question. For the cost sharing requirement, will there be an adjustment for disadvantaged businesses like there was in the first round? I'm not aware of any adjustments. Are you, Dave?
No, it's a 70% cost sharing there, so you don't get any reduction like you did in MCAP or in the first round. However, under the discretionary scoring, there's up to 15 points that could be awarded if you can demonstrate that you're a disadvantaged or an underserved business.
Okay, next question is, would a new facility build for a plant's retail operation require a feasibility study? They already sell retail, but want to expand into a new location. That one can be tricky. You mentioned a few words there that we would want to dive deeper into. If the new location is a new market, then yes, you're going to have a feasibility study. If that's not what you meant, you might want to send us an email and we can clarify that. Next question is, we have recently entered into a joint venture to produce non-amenable species products. Our company has a grant of inspection and the other company doesn't. So we will be producing. We are hopeful of receiving the MCAP grant. Would this exclude us from applying for MPEP phase 2? If so, if we form a new corporate jointly owned entity for purposes of the joint vendor, could the joint venture then apply? Dave, you want this one?
I'm going to need I think we need to visit with you about that and exactly how it would be structured.
Yeah. A
Um,
couple cautions I would throw out is you can only receive one grant under this entity. So if you are going to set up a new entity, you have to keep in mind you're going to probably have to have a feasibility study, which takes time. You've got to have all of your entity establishment numbers, of course, EIN, EUI, SAM.gov, grants.gov. You have to have all this set up, and you're down to about 10 or 11 weeks to get this done. So setting up a new operation might be tough, but I would definitely recommend you reach out separately, and let's dive into this exact situation.
Now they do allow, one entity that has multiple locations can apply. You have to have your environmental, you're gonna have to do your NEPA on both things, but then there also are some limitations of multiple applications from a same entity. So yeah, Chris is exactly right. We'd want to dive into this in more depth.
Yeah. Next question is, when will IAG awards be announced? We don't have that information. They are under review, and they don't give us a heads up of what day they're going to make that award. So we can't help you on that one. Next question is, where can we find a qualified third party to conduct a feasibility study? I know that the link was added to the chat of our resource directory. That does have a listing of consultants on that resource directory. Again, those are consultants that have reached out to us to be added to our resource directory. We also encourage people to reach out to the small business development centers in your area. They are located in every state. A lot of them are at universities, and they can provide a lot of assistance to you at no charge. So, but check out the resource directory and your SBDCs. If you can't find anyone, reach out. We'll try to help you. Next question is, you mentioned that there's a call this coming Friday for learning the step-by-step registration with Colleen Whitehead, who, by the way, was incredible. Good job, Colleen. I know you're on the call. As was Rebecca, and Rebecca's on the call. Good job, ladies. How do I register for that call, and when specifically is it? It's on Friday at the same time, and the same email and newsletter blast that went out with this webinar has the sign up link for that webinar as well. If you can't find it, email it. Shondine or any of us on this call can get that to you.
I think Nicole or Shondine will put it in the chat too, the link as well.
That would be helpful, yeah. Next question. What is a net profit margin for a business plan that is acceptable for the industry? Slaughter, processing beef, pork, lamb, goat. Question 2 is, what kind of in-kind matching is allowed toward the 70%? Mike, I recommend we dive into this offline and on a separate email chain or call. Reach out to any one of us. We can all talk through this with you. Most people would tell you anything above 0 would be a good profit margin on meat processing, but nobody wants to be negative. Reach out and we'll try to dive into that with you. Next question, Mr. Washington, do you have a particular parcel? Do you have to have a particular parcel of land already identified for the grant? Does it need to be under our control time of submission? If you use your land, does that count to the cost share? Dave, you want that one?
Yeah, so yes, you should have your property identified, because you're going to have to demonstrate that you have the ability to develop your facility. And of course, one of the things that's required is a place to put it. So you need to have that identified. You don't need to have a purchase. You need to have like a letter of intent or contract or some other documentation that will be verified at the time of the award. Your land, if you already own it, does not count to cost share. Again, only thing for cost share are expenses that are going to be incurred after the grant is awarded. So you can't use existing land or facilities as a part of that cost share. They have to be items that would be eligible for the MPPEP funding otherwise.
All right, thank you for that. Next question is, would MPU require feasibility? And I'm assuming that MPU is mobile processing unit. If it's a new business, yes. If it's a new market, yes. The only way you would not have to have a feasibility is if you have been in business over a year, and if you're just expanding capacity on an existing facility. So more than likely, Chantel, you're going to have a feasibility study. But again, send us an email. Let's talk through your project specifically. We always like to dive into the details so that we make sure and give you the right answer. So reach out. I think you have our email as well. You can email us direct. Next question. If we plan to process whole animals that are already slaughtered, but by expanding our facility and add equipment can give local farmers greater access to value add processing, will we be considered if we are not doing the slaughtering and only processing? You want to let him down there, Dave?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. This one is, they've been very specific that you have to slaughter the animals that you're processing. I know MCAP had some latitude there that you could demonstrate that you were doing some things if you were only a value added or a further processing facility, but this one's very specific. You have to slaughter the animals.
And from our friends in Puerto Rico, our letters of support pages part of the limit of 35.
Well, your forms, your letters, your environmental checklist, all of those do not count against that 35-page limit.
Let's see, next question. We got approved for the 2021 MPPEP grant. Does this keep me from being eligible?
MPPEP helped you get your grant of federal inspection, which USDA loves.
And then our friends in Northern New York here, is a feasibility study required in an application for a completely new processing center? Yes, it would be, Emma. We can help you through that process as well, Emma, if you need. Reach out direct and we'll work with you on that. Next question, or maybe not a question from Stephen here. Thanks for the wonderful webinar and all the support you provide to the processors. Thank you very much, Stephen. Always glad to see you all on the call. Next question, do we need to do a full environmental survey or just the checklist? I have another project with USDA rural development. They required full environmental survey, including SHPO, which can be pretty extensive since the State Historic Commission gets involved. Is that the same for this grant? Amy, yes, it is the same, but it does not have to be done before the grant application is submitted. You do have to submit the checklist with your application, but you do not have to go through the entire NEPA process unless you're awarded. But by submitting the checklist and submitting the application, you are agreeing to follow the NEPA guidelines. So hope that helps. Next question, for a new facility, your business LLC can't purchase land from you to build the business. Intent would be to separate the land from personal to business. Mike, I think we should dive into that. If there's a business that's buying land to build a facility on, we would just have to see how you're separating that. We'd have to dive into details on that a little bit, but very likely if you're going to use grant funds to buy land and build a new facility on, that could be an acceptable grant expense. A comment here, this webinar has been incredibly helpful and well organized. Kudos to you all. Thank you, Carol, for that. Yep. Next question, just want to make sure I understand correctly. The grant can cover 30% of the project, but then we have to take care of the 70% remaining. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. And looks
we
like
will try and, help you locate some other sources for that funding. Another program that USDA Rural Development had is the Meat and Poultry Intermediary Lending Program. And there's funds that have gone out to nonprofit groups and some agencies that, can provide some low interest financing. A lot of those have been allocated, but some are still available. There are other, things. So we'll try and help you identify that as best we can.
Yeah, for sure. I think our last question here, Dave, is if our feasibility study is a year old, is it still usable? The comment I would have for you, Peter, is a lot of times your numbers can change with the market. So as construction costs have been updated over the last year, or maybe market data, I would recommend that you relook at that and make sure it's all still relevant. And whoever you had do that, if they're just going to be updating it and maybe verifying that the numbers are still accurate, they should be able to at least update the date and at least show an updated timeline on that. But that would be my recommendation there.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You don't need a whole new feasibility study, but just go through and try and update it as best as possible.
Yeah. And I think that's it, Dave.
All right, good. Well, Shandine, we'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you both, everyone here who was able to show and share with us this hour for our presentation on MPPEP Phase 2. Thank you, Dave, Rob, for your presentation, and thank you, Chris, for joining us for the Q&A session and getting an abundance of information to our audience today. If anyone has any additional questions, or if they would like to request technical assistance with the MPPTA program, you guys can find the MPPTA request form on the Flower Hill Institute website at flowerhill.institute/USDA-MPPTA. Or you can reach out to Flower Hill Institute directly at USDA@flowerhill.institute. Again, thank you everyone for taking the time today to go
Shandine,
over.
one last thing too is this webinar has been recorded, so it will be in our toolkit, and anybody that wasn't able to attend but might be use this information, don't hesitate to refer them to it.
Yes, thank you, Dave.
Yep.
And yeah, without further ado, thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you, everybody.